After a girls' trip, my wife left without saying anything and returned years later, expecting forgiveness, but I decided to move on. It's common to hear statements like, "I never saw it coming," and that's precisely how it went for me. To be honest, I thought we were doing well for the most part during the 4 years we were married. We had plans and a life plan laid out, but the problem was that we both wanted children. Or at least I think we did, as soon as we were married. The problem is that we started talking seriously about it, and she would frequently express her desire, for she would even spend time on the internet planning the lives of our future children while looking through baby gear and clothing. It kept us connected and served as a sort of conversation starter. We were excited to start this new chapter in our lives together, and everything seemed to be going according to plan. But after receiving some terrible news that devastated me, we went to a doctor to find out what was wrong. After a few months of trying to conceive, to cut a long tale short, the doctor told us that our chances of becoming parents, of naturally becoming parents, was very limited because my count was much too low. It felt like a stomach punch, and I felt worthless. Our entire set of plans was wiped out in a flash. I was hit hard, terribly hard by the news, and I ended up in a pretty awful position for a while, but therapy eventually helped. At first, she seemed to be quite supportive, saying that it didn't matter and that she would be content with us alone, but there was something odd about the way she said it. She seemed to have dropped it far too soon. She said she didn't need children to be happy. I know that people's opinions change, but her whole attitude seemed odd to me. She had stopped talking about babies and seemed to have a different perspective on me. She would make little jabs at me that she had never said before, like how I wasn't taking care of myself, that I should exercise, or that I should be more productive around the house. Sure, I could have put on a few pounds, but it seemed like she was always looking for excuses to accuse me, and she would brush it off when I asked her about the sudden change in attitude. She would say that I was being overly sensitive and that I was just dreaming. But I knew something was wrong. She wasn't the same as the woman I married, who would spend hours sitting with me talking about our future. She wasn't particularly cruel, but there was a certain coldness about her, as if she had already checked out and was just playing the part. I guess that over time, I started to trust her when she reassured me that everything was fine to avoid, coming across as needy or insecure, so I stopped pressing. In any case, after a few years, we were barely scraping by and had fallen into a pattern, where we barely talked about anything significant and appeared to be more like housemates than husband and wife. She would always brush off my attempts to bring up other options like adoption or surrogacy by saying that she didn't want to think about them. I never really trusted her when she said that as long as we were together, I was happy, and she seemed more interested in convincing herself than I was. Suddenly, she told me that she wanted to take a girls' trip. She had already done this a few times, and I had long encouraged her to go to America with her friends. I didn't think twice about it because we had built this trust over the years, so I made sure she had everything she needed, helped her pack, and drove her to the airport. I remember her last words before she left. "Thank you for being so supportive." I thought it was a little odd that she would say that because I hadn't done anything particularly noteworthy, but she seemed so sincere that I dismissed it as her way of saying thank you. I stayed up that night to make sure everything went smoothly by calling her when she landed, keeping an eye on the time and watching TV. I called her to check in and waited for her to text me to let me know that she had landed because her flight was supposed to take about 9 hours. The phone kept ringing, but no one answered, so I didn't think much about it because I assumed she was tired and might have gone straight to her hotel and crashed. However, when morning came and I still hadn't heard from her, I started to worry that maybe she was just busy, or that her phone was on quiet. So I tried calling again and texted her a few times, but after a few more hours, I was officially freaking out. Of radio silence, I finally called her sister to see if she had heard from her. I was starting to get to this point, thinking that maybe something had gone wrong with her phone, or that she simply hadn't had time to check in. I even went so far as to call her companions, who were supposed to be traveling with her, but they were also confused when I called them because they didn't go with her on the trip back home. Instead, they were sitting 2 streets away, enjoying coffee. It finally hit me then that she wasn't traveling with any girls, and she didn't have any friends. She just disappeared. It felt like my stomach had fallen through the floor as I sat there with the phone. I couldn't understand why she would lie to me and why she wouldn't tell me before leaving. I tried to convince myself that it was some kind of mistake, like maybe she missed a connecting flight or that she had been unable to continue because of an emergency. But I knew deep down that she had planned and that the entire girls' trip was part of whatever she had been imagining. I couldn't wake up as if I were living. I had never married a woman like this before, and in a nightmare, I didn't even recognize her. The coldness, the way she had stopped talking about our future, and the little jabs about my appearance and health all started to make sense. I hadn't realized, or maybe I hadn't wanted to, that she had been drifting away for a while. That night, I sat there looking at my phone, hoping for a call, a text, or anything, but nothing came through, and I knew deep down that it wouldn't. When I woke up the next morning, I remembered lying there and staring at the ceiling, and I thought it was all a dream. I was in complete denial for the first few days. I kept ringing her phone in the hopes of hearing her voice and maybe getting an explanation, and I even left messages in the hopes that she would understand, even though I was half the time at a loss for words. However, I only got silence, which strangely made things worse. She had gone after packing her bag, and she disappeared. The promises I had made to myself the night before. Maybe she was late, or maybe her phone died, and she had planned this and wanted to go. In the end, I went there more times than I can recall, to talk to her mother and get answers because they must have felt sorry for me when I couldn't bring myself to cook. Her mom would prepare meals for me and occasionally let me stay there while I pondered all the little things that didn't make sense, trying to figure out how my life had suddenly become so complicated and to be aware of what had gone wrong. Her family was initially just as shocked as I was because they hadn't heard from her, and her mother didn't know anything about her plans. On some days, I would go over all of our arguments and conversations to try to figure out what caused her to leave. I kept thinking about what I could have done better and how I could have kept our marriage intact. It may sound dramatic, but I was focused on figuring it out. It seemed like the solution would somehow make everything better. There were times when I was too numb to talk and just sat there in silence. I alternated between anger, despair, and regret. What went wrong was a question I kept asking myself. Was there a sign I missed, slept, or ate? And my work also started to suffer. When people noticed that I was busy with personal matters, I would simply brush it off by saying that I was occupied with personal matters. I eventually told a few close friends in therapy, and they did their best to distract me by taking me out to hang out and encouraging me to move on. But I would still wonder where my wife was and why I wasn't enough to keep around, even when I was with them. The constant questions from strangers, including the worst parts, were my neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, and even former coworkers who had heard that I was married. It was like pulling out a new scab every time someone asked how married life was treating you and how your wife was doing. I would just smile and tell them that everything was fine because I didn't dare to tell them that she had left. But every time I repeated that lie, it felt heavier. The only thing that worked in the end was therapy, even though I had never gone before. But after a few months of barely functioning, I realized I couldn't handle it alone. I contacted a therapist and started going once a week, and it helped. I would have restless nights, and I would lie awake over and over again, reliving everything. The therapist helped me realize that if it had been a magical moment, she wouldn't have stayed here, and it wasn't my fault that she decided to leave. It was a tough pill to swallow, and I felt like I was flawed and had somehow alienated her for a long time. But I graduated and started to see things differently. I decided to ignore her long-standing coldness and distance, assuming that things would get better. I had convinced myself that I could keep my cool and that our marriage could be saved by my efforts alone. I also realized that it wasn't hurt, so as time went on, I started to rebuild my life in small steps. It wasn't until she left that I realized how much I had lost in our marriage. I had always done everything in my power to ensure she was, and that our home life was comfortable, but now that I had so much, I didn't know what to do. So I started doing things I had forgotten about, like cooking, going to the gym, and starting. Although I had always been good at what I did, I now gave it my all. The extra hours, the concentration, and I got a promotion as a result of it, something I would never have obtained if I had been moping about my problems, even though there were still painful days. I was barely keeping up with my job at first, just going through the motions. But when I started to feel more like myself, I worked harder at my job and felt like I still had control over something in my life, which was one of the few things that gave me a sense of accomplishment. I would sometimes look at things that reminded me of her and wonder if she ever thought of me or if she ever felt about what she had done. But slowly, those moments started to fade away, and I was able to move on a little more easily each time. I also reconnected with people I hadn't seen much since getting married, and we resumed our activities like hiking and going to the golf range, which I hadn't done in years. Having people by my side who weren't involved in the mess, and who could help me move on without reminding me, I felt like I had lost a lot of who I was when she left, as if she had taken a piece of me with her. But I was rediscovering who I was, piece by piece, and even though it wasn't quick or easy, I was making progress. I was finally able to see someone who wasn't defined by her past actions when I looked in the mirror at the end of that year. I wasn't just the man whose wife had abandoned him. I had rebuilt, I had survived, and I felt as though I could now genuinely live my life without her shadow. For the first time in years, she was hovering over me, and I was proud that I thought I had moved on from everything. After all that chaos, life had finally started to seem normal again, or as close to normal as it could be. My work was going great, my friends kept me busy, and I had my routine down pat. Even though I still occasionally had flashbacks to strange memories, they weren't as frequent as they used to be when everything I did was somehow related to her. As a result, she was the last person I expected to be standing there when someone knocked on my door one Saturday morning. But there she was with a baby, and I felt cold in my doorway. It was like seeing a ghost, and for a brief moment, my brain just stopped working. She was still dressed normally, but she seemed to genuinely think that I would be happy to see her. I thought I was overcaring, so yes, that got to me. However, meeting her again brought back feelings that I had previously repressed. So at first I just stood there and stared as if nothing had happened. She smiled at me before asking if I could enter, since she simply appeared as though I should be greeting her return. Despite her somewhat confused appearance, she stayed in her spot and just started telling her story. She started by saying, "I know this might be a shock, but I wanted to come back and explain everything." Her expression was hopeful, as though she truly thought I would be willing to listen. I was tempted to just close the door and laugh in her face, but I was too intrigued to do so because I wanted to know why she had disappeared. However, I kept my composure and told her, "No, you can stay right there," explaining that I didn't want her in my house, bringing all that commotion back into the one area I had created for myself. She went on to explain that she had Ed leaving, and that she had realized that she had lost the greatest thing that had ever happened to her. She said that after years of ignoring me, she had given it a lot of thought, and had finally realized what was important in life after having this child. She said, "This is our second chance," looking down at the baby. What I was hearing was unbelievable, as if this child were some kind of magical reset button that would allow us to resume where we left off. The last question that had been bothering me since she appeared was why she left. I tried to speak as steadily as I could, but I wasn't sure how much longer I could contain myself now that she was here. I needed to hear it from her because I had tortured myself with all the possibilities for years in an attempt to understand. I was furious on the inside, but I tried to keep a neutral appearance. She continued by saying that even though she had made a grave error, we could now start over, just the three of us. Why did you leave? The truth, or at least what I believed it to be, was that she admitted that she had left because she wanted a child and had found someone who could give it to her because I couldn't. She said this as if it were unimportant, as if she hadn't ruined my life, and as if I should just nod and accept it as gospel. She explained that even though the man she had left didn't stay, she had already given birth and had suddenly realized that she wanted me back. I stopped to consider the confession, which she was saying. She broke down in tears and apologized, admitting that she had made a big mistake, but I remained unmoved. She continued talking about how she knew she was supposed to be with me and that I was the one she truly loved. She sounded so crazy that I was shocked. I could see clearly on her face that it was desperation, not love. You left because you thought someone else had his baby, and now you think you can come back and pretend like nothing happened. I listened to it all as I stood there, but I had had enough. I told her straight away that you made your choice a long time ago, and now you have to live with it. There's no second chance here. She looked shocked, as if she had never even imagined that I would say no, as if she thought she could just stroll back into my life because it had been for her to be a single mother. She tried to portray herself as the victim in all of this, acting as though her choices hadn't led her to this point. It would work for her. She became irate. Just when I thought she would finally get it and leave, she got upset with me, accusing me of being selfish and demanding that I give her another chance to make amends. She claimed that she could have taken half of everything and divorced me at that point if she had wanted to, and she even had the gall to say that the house should still belong to her. I felt a wave of relief, as it seemed like her true self was finally coming to light in front of me. I didn't argue with her. I didn't speak louder. We're done. You wanted a different life, and now you have it. This stranger, who thought she could pick up the pieces when it was convenient for her, took the place of the woman I had loved and married, feeling lighter than I have in years. I simply replied, looking at her, and then I closed the door in, her face interrupting her if she had any more words to say. As I stood there, I heard her muffled screaming coming from the other side of the door, and I knew I would never allow her to return. I moved away from the door and took a seat, and I think that was it. After I closed the door behind her, I assumed she would comprehend and just leave. But instead, she started banging on the door and yelling different things. Her intention seemed absurd to me. She wanted to stand there and demand that I listen to her while I was in the only place that was mine, the only place where I had been able to recover from the catastrophe she had left me in. At first, I thought I would ignore it and let her scream until she got tired, but then I began to wonder what kinds of excuses she would make this time. I opened the door just enough to let her know I was listening, but not enough to let her in. She seemed surprised. She started a long monologue in which she expressed her willingness to forgive me for closing the door on her and her desire to start over. She went on and on about how if we both worked hard, we could work things out. I couldn't contain myself at that moment, and I laughed because this woman had more nerve than I had ever seen. When I did that, she looked as if I should feel guilty for not paying attention to her. Her face flushed, and she started talking about how she had been so lost after leaving and how she had realized her mistake too late. "You don't understand how it was for me," she said, but I didn't believe her. I told her that she had to leave, that she had planned it, made up a false story about it, and then carried it out. Now her remorse meant nothing, and that's when she lost it. Her entire tone changed, and she stopped performing the melancholy, repentant act, and she started attacking me, accusing me of being unfair and lacking the grace to. I simply stood in awe of this woman who had left me without saying anything, and now felt she should be compensated in some way for not trying to defraud me, as if she were worthy of praise for not being as awful as she could have been. "Give me another chance," she said bravely, "because I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have taken half of everything you own. So what am I supposed to be grateful for? Grateful that you only ditched me and didn't take my stuff with you?" Her expression was a mixture of rage and something more, possibly desperation or guilt, as she looked at me, but, to be honest, I didn't give a damn by then. I felt as though the burden I had been carrying around had finally been lifted, when I finally met her for who she was. However, she wasn't done yet. She started to pace my porch while complaining that I would regret not giving her another chance, and that I would never find someone like her. In fact, by refusing to take her back, she tried to make me feel as though I was the one who was missing out. It was odd, as if I should be begging her to stay here, because she was the one who ruined everything when she realized I wasn't going to back down, she became even louder and kept complaining about how I had forced her to leave in the first place. She claimed that if I had been more understanding about the whole child situation, nothing like this would have happened. Her reasoning seemed to suggest that I had failed her as a husband because I couldn't conceive, which somehow excused her from leaving to have a child with someone else. Her mental acrobatics were astounding, and I was shocked that she was trying to place the blame on me. I told her bluntly, "Look, if you wanted a kid that badly, you could have told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to me." And she just looked at me like I had hit her while she was making plans to leave. But I stopped her because I said, "You are on your own, and now you've got to live with it. That's not my problem." She made one last attempt to return to her dejected expression, asking me to think about the boy and how I was being unfair by ignoring him. She took advantage of the child in her arms to make me feel, acting like I was the bad guy in this scenario. But I wasn't buying into it. I could see her finally coming to terms with the fact that I would never change my mind and that I would never allow her back into my life. I could see the anger waning and being replaced by something else, whether it was genuine regret or just a desire to do well on an exam, but I didn't care. She had tried to walk all over me and expected me to smile and give her credit, but now she was just a stranger for a few more seconds. She stood there as if she were waiting for me to decide to call her back. I didn't say anything else, though. When it finally hit her that, in my heart, I knew that I had already made up my mind and that there was no going back. But as I walked away from the door, it was over, even though she had spent so much time hoping to return using manipulation to get back into my life. I had freedom, neither for her nor for us, and there was going to be no more chance now that she was only a memory that I had finally relegated to the past. I stood there and watched her expression, and I closed the door without giving it another look. I didn't wait for her to rap on it again, but I felt like I had finally won. I was ready to move on because I had finally found the closure I didn't realize I needed this time. Everything was truly finished, but of course it wasn't as tidy a conclusion as I had planned. After years of suffering and shame, I finally felt a strange sense of tranquility. As soon as I closed that door behind me, I no longer felt sad, furious, or even surprised. Her mother was a person who had been very helpful to me when her daughter left, and I could tell that she was upset about the situation. I didn't want to be dragged back into it, so I just said, "Thanks for checking in," and didn't say anything else. I wasn't going to waste time explaining my decision, and I wasn't going to give her mother any more information. She knew it was over because she understood that I had learned tidbits over the following through social media and mutual connections. She had returned to living with her parents, and things weren't going well. The father of the child, the man she had left me for, wasn't involved at all. He had bailed her out, leaving her to fend for herself because it seemed he hadn't committed to the long term. She had effectively burned every bridge, and her former friends who had supported me when she first disappeared didn't feel sorry for her or want to get involved in her drama because they had all moved on, and you can't hold them accountable. Since her father called me shortly after her mother texted me, I was aware that they didn't have enough money to support her and the child. His straightforward but polite message was that they were having financial difficulties and that I might be able to help them in some way. He continued talking about the infant and how difficult things were for them, saying, "We know you cared about her." I listened politely, but I couldn't help but giggle a little because I could tell he was talking endlessly about how his daughter only needed a little help to get back on her feet. I gently told him that his daughter made her own decisions and that I wasn't in the right frame of mind or in a position to help because he didn't pursue it further. I think he understood the message before I knew it, because her friends and people I hadn't spoken to in years started contacting me. Some of them tried to use the guilt angle, saying that she was going through a tough time and that maybe I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. She even dared to say that the child needed a father figure and that I shouldn't let my resentment get in the way of my attempts to help him. However, I refused to give up, and I refused to let anyone make me feel for making my own choice. I had finally given that woman everything I had after years of feeling inadequate, and she had thrown it all away instead of depending on me to save her. The calls and messages gradually dwindled in volume before stopping altogether, as if everyone finally understood that I was serious about moving on and not getting caught again. At that point, for the first time in years, My life felt normal and peaceful. I had my friends, my job, and my routines. I had rebuilt my life. It wasn't a fancy, glamorous life, but it was mine. And the irony is that I once again started to find happiness in the little things that I hadn't given much thought to when I was married. I would read books I had been meaning to read for years, cook food, and go for walks. It felt to be free, and I realized that I could live my life as I pleased without anyone's approval. For once, I felt as though I had slowly regained my life. Occasionally, I would run into someone who knew us both, and they would ask, "Hey, what happened to her?" I would reply succinctly, polite reply, and change the subject. I just didn't want to keep returning to a chapter that was so clearly over. It wasn't that I was hiding anything. I had finally mastered the art of leaving her in the past. When I last heard from her, things weren't going well. She was still bouncing between her parents' house and friends' couches after her welcome, and she was struggling to maintain a job. Occasionally, people I don't often interact with would message me to let me know that she was from anyone who would listen. Some of them even implied that they hoped I would change my mind and end their relationship, playing dad to her child, but that was not going to happen because I had already spent too much time and energy rebuilding my life to think about going that route. Her safety net wasn't going to be me simply because things didn't work out the way she had hoped. I wasn't going to be the one to pick up the pieces, and nothing was going to drag me back into that chapter. In the end, I think I got the necessary closure. She was now dealing with the consequences of her choices, and for the first time since the day she left, I felt like I was finally free, had moved on, but not in a very dramatic way. I think that was enough. Thank you for watching. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and click the notification bell to be informed of more startling real-life tales that are happening in your area.